Welcome back to our panel discussion, The Truth About IT Opex and Software-Defined Networking, sponsored by Avaya Government Solutions here on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. Our guests today are Tom Bayer, the CIO of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Wolf Tombe, the Chief Technology Officer of Customs and Border Protection, Frank Konieczny, the CTO in the Office of Information Dominance and CIO at the Air Force, Lorraine Cleary, Director of Product Management and Network Sales Specialist for Avaya Government Solutions, and Eric Olson, Director of Enterprise Systems Engineering in the Office of the CIO at the Justice Department. And now we're going to look a little bit into the future. And I'd like to get a sense of how agencies go about planning for their, again, focusing on the network and the wide area network, how you've planned for capacity and technology, say 1, 3, and 5 years out, if you do look that far out. Frank, how does the Air Force do it?
I mean, we look that far out. We look at the requirements process, look at gap analysis as to what's not there right now. For instance, as we're progressing on the aerial network, we're looking at how we're going to define the aerial network in terms of TCP/IP, which is not what's done right now. It's through Link 16 and some other tactical protocols. So we're trying to redefine that as we talk about it. Now that's a long-range program, like five years out at least, because you have to realize that we want to change equipment. It takes a long time to get all the, in our case, airplanes and everything else adjusted to the new equipment space. Now for the terrestrial network, I mean, as part of JIE, we're trying to analyze everything and put everything together in terms of how JIE is supposed to support all of DoD as opposed to just the Air Force. And so that program is going on right now with some deliveries, probably beginning of, the end of this year, and we're going to start experimenting with that. So that's going to be another probably 3 years before you actually see the network transformed for all of DoD. But then again, it's requirements analysis. It's how much. And this is where we always get stuck. It's the requirements of looking at the bandwidth on the network. And as we have lots of moving parts. There's applications that are moving now to core data centers. Well, that's going to affect the base and also the connections into the core data centers. And then there's applications that have to reside on the base for mission effectiveness. So as everything, the problem is everything is changing and evolving. Mm-hmm. And so you have to try to keep up with all these changing requirements and have the network, support that. That's why it'd be nice if we had a software-defined network.
But it's safe to say that the aircraft themselves will be networked in the future.
Yeah, they're networked right now.
But that network is not totally unrelated to the JIE terrestrial network.
No, they all have to be linked together. It's going to be a solid network across the board because as we require that we send videos to soldiers in the field, you're going to see that, yes, they have a mobile device, and yes, we have to somehow get that video to them from the aircraft to their forward base of operations and try to manage that. That's all part of the network, which we haven't really talked about, here, but it's very interesting when you get down to the actual person in the field.
Right, that distant end user who's really your tooth.
That's right, and they're the ones you have to support.
Sure. So, Wolf, you've got a similar situation, I guess, in Customs and Border Protection. In fact, some of the new requisitions are calling for more drones and so forth. Yep. So you've got aircraft, and you've got people on the front lines and people in the offices and so on. So what's your planning process for future capacity, and how far out do you look?
Yeah, so we have a mission IT partnership organization because it really is the mission has to be involved. What are their requirements? What are they driving to? So, for example, we're deploying a whole lot more sensors along the border. Well, with the Internet of Things advent, all those sensors are now digital. They need IP numbers. They can communicate sometimes in a mesh network. And how do we accommodate that? So we're actually really pushing IPv6 hard because our NATed address range won't handle it anymore. So we're getting too many devices out there. We have to go to IPv6. But in terms of future looking like over the next 5 years, we do have a 4-year roadmap that we look at emerging technologies. We look at where industry is on that roadmap, and we use a tool that actually allows us to query like the Fortune 500 companies and say, in general, what percentage of them are adopting this? What problems have they encountered? What value did they see out of it? What risks did they see out of it? So we can compare how we're doing with industry, and that's a really important factor for us because sometimes we're a little bit ahead, sometimes we're on par, and sometimes we choose to be a little bit behind, like with software-defined networking, because it is still so evolving. But we do have an entire segment of that roadmap which is dedicated just to the network. That's how important it is. So we're looking right now at pushing virtual network capabilities out as our first foray in getting ready for that software-defined networking capability when it is available. And it's interesting because there's always a push there with vendors because our hardware vendors don't like that. If I can virtualize routers and switches, that means I don't need all these physical routers and switches. So there's a push and a pull there with the vendor community, but they're coming along.
But a lot of the the boxes that are not switches and routers are offered as virtual machines pretty much now across the board now anyway. Load balancers and all these optimizing, those are all available as a non-physical machine.
Yeah.
And Eric, you're nodding your head too, notwithstanding that you used infrastructure as a managed service, but you still want to stay in control of your technology direction.
Absolutely. So, similar along the lines of the process that Wolf described, sort of three big pieces to this. So one is, keeping an eye on the dynamics in the application space that are driving the network requirements. So we already talked about mobile enablement. We talked about the interconnection with service providers as we start to move to cloud. Other, big things that are sort of shaping that space. Collaboration platforms here, I'm talking about things like web conferencing, instant messaging, desktop sharing, all those kinds of things. High definition video teleconferencing, distance learning, in other words, understanding what's happening in the application space and how that is going to begin to affect your network. Then doing a lot of, to be quite honest, just talking with other agencies, other corporations, again, that are similarly situated. We don't want to be figuring this out on our own for the first time. We want to be leveraging those best practices and lessons learned wherever we can. So sort of the second step is, get input from lots of different sources and then determine how is that changing our requirements, and then engage with, our service provider to figure out how we're going to begin to bake these things into the service going forward. What is the art of the possible in terms of what's a real service offering? Because we're very conscious of the price of doing all of this, and so the value proposition needs to be there.
Yeah, if it was free, we'd all do it, right?
Exactly.
We'd all do it tomorrow. Tom, what about the SEC? Describe your future needs and how you figure out what they are.
So we're seeing a huge increase in demand for video conferencing and also other applications. We are trying to have our associate population work smarter, and how we do that is we automate our business processes, change our applications, and drive more throughput and efficiency and effectiveness to our user group by creating better applications. All of that results in higher bandwidth utilization. More utilization within the networks is also being driven by mobile computing applications and video conferencing and sharing of data, as previously mentioned. So all of that makes us define our networks better, drive more efficiency in our utilization of those networks, and also to tailor and engineer those networks to make them more effective.
All right, so effectiveness we've talked about a lot today, and we've decided, I guess, or kind of concluded that software-defined networking has a lot of potential, not quite there yet. Lorraine, what do you do in the meantime?
Well, there are other protocols out there. So if you look at software-defined networking, you can break it out into two things. Right now, the network that runs is like a maze, okay? It works, but you have to navigate it, and it's difficult to navigate. A lot of agencies actually for QoS, because it's too hard to run multiple services on the same network, they just create another network. So there's data networks out there, voice networks, and video networks. Now you've got three different networks.
Subways, bus lines, and trolleys.
Absolutely. So talk about complexity. You have the same level of complexity on multiple different networks. Now you're trying to automate just the provisioning. So you're just trying to automate how difficult it is to run the network as it is. What if you didn't have to automate 80% of that? So there is a standard, the IEEE and the IETF, and they've been working on this for a while. It's been 10 years. They realized that when MPLS came out, it was the height of complexity. And protocols upon protocols have been building up over the years, and you had to deal with what was there already. So if you needed a new service like multicast for video, you added a new protocol, PIM. If you wanted to make the switching over the wide area network a little bit easier, you came out with MPLS. So what the IEEE and the ITF did was they just threw everything back out on the floor and they put it back together in a more efficient way. They just took the best of breed from Ethernet, ISIS, everything that's already standardized, and just repackaged it into a protocol called IEEE 802.1AQ, shortest path bridging. What that does is it gives you a very smooth path from point A to point B that you then put SDN on top of, and you start to automate the services like your firewalls and your balancers, because the network isn't the problem anymore. We're at the point where the network shouldn't even be the issue. And unfortunately it is, because we're still trying to accommodate all these 30-year-old technologies there. So there are alternatives, and that was the point at the end of the day, is do proof of concepts. Have your vendors come in and show you what they have, and make your decision. It will clearly come out what the differences are.
So this 802.1 AQ, this is something that's widely adopted by industry? I mean, do
we have
10 vendors have it?
We have multiple vendors. We've ran it at major Sochi Olympics, the entire network, end to end. Wired and wireless, we're run on that, all on Avaya equipment with over 40,000 users. It was a very large scale, completely virtualized network where we automate it, and everything that all these agencies are trying to do right now is to give the user the same experience they have in the office as they do out in the field. It's like taking a rubber band and making your network as flexible as possible. That's what SPB can give you.
All right. So, Wolf, does that sound like something that you would use or have tried or looked at? Or
yeah,
is
we're
this
certainly going to look into it. And it sounds very promising, but we have to see how it really works.
Yeah, so earlier Lorraine said, have people bring in their equipment and test it. I mean, how do you work with vendors? Do you make them show you the stuff?
We do. And so we in CBP, I run these technology surveillance program for emerging technology, and I work closely with the Science and Technology Director at the department. And so we do look at new technologies, and we do have vendors come in, but what we try to do, to be fair, is understand what the options are in the emerging technology, so we can say, well, we think this is our government criteria for using that. And then we have the vendors say yes or no, they agree with that. Then we run the tests, and the tests speak for themselves.
I mean, it's a little bit of chicken and egg. I mean, the government has to lead the vendors, but the vendors are inventing this, so
and they have to explain what
the
the potentials are, so that we can understand it and say, okay, we think this would be our criteria for that. Let's run the tests.
All right. And Eric, do you like proof of concept in a physical way, like really seeing it, show me the bits and the bytes flowing, and let me see what that thing is going to do for me? Absolutely.
But, I think I do have a bit of a contrarian view on this, coming at it from an infrastructure as a service perspective. Let's look at, as an IT organization, a large federal agency, we have a million things on our plate. And, I've got across a diverse set of different technology opportunities, similar kind of emerging things. Love to get involved with it, love to see the benefit. But I think when you look at overall what's happening across the government and now the proclivity, to consume IT services from service providers, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, application as a service, we're really delegating, in effect, you will, the assimilation and the proof of concept and the validation of all these technologies to the service provider industry to show us that it works, show us that it gives us a better value, show us that it improves performance, show us that it gives us a better price, because we've all got a lot of things to work on.
So you're still ultimately managing to that service level agreement, regardless of what is feeding it.
That's right.
All right. And Tom, you've got, again, you mentioned big future requirements as more and more documentation, and it's probably going to be multimedia someday instead of those charts and graphs we've been reading all these years. Do you make sure that do you make them look at the whites of your eyes and you look at the whites of their eyes when you come in and evaluate technology?
We do. We have a proof of concept period. We also have labs that we evaluate new technology in. But I also am a big believer that we should begin to outsource this as much as possible, and provide our providers should meet target service levels going forward. So I'm a big believer that we need to transition from being the providers ourselves into being a consumer of these technologies. I believe that we should specify that our providers be efficient and as effective as possible in meeting our service level agreements.
I mean, in a way, that's what a lot of federal agencies face, and SEC is a great example. You've got this big data gathering operational piece, but then upstairs there's all these policy people trying to write rules and keep an eye on industry, and they don't really want to go downstairs with screwdrivers.
That's right. And
Well, maybe you do, but most people don't.
Right. So we need to focus our headcount in policy and in mission delivery versus technology. And so in order to minimize that headcount allocation, we would like to outsource as much as possible.
And when's the last time you personally ever used a soldering iron?
A long time ago, unfortunately.
All right. And Frank, last word for the Air Force. What kind of, I know Air Force is big on fly-offs. Does that also go down to the technologies for moving data?
First of all, we do pilot programs, and we also let Air Force Research Lab also get at it and determine some capabilities. But we usually ask them, any vendor, do they have a similar population that they already have fielded their software at? Because since we're so large, that it's very difficult when you get that many people and that many network connectivities, and how much throughput you have to have, and reliability of service and security. So we like to have not necessarily a slow adapter, but necessarily something that says we have to be able to look at what's been done already and then see if it's really compatible. Now, we probably ask, we can do penetration testing, Tom, at your facility, and a few others to make sure that, it would live up to the requirements of reliability and security.
All right, and we're going to have to leave it there. That brings our show to a close. I want to thank today's guests, Eric Olson, Director of Enterprise Systems Engineering in the Office of the CIO at the Justice Department. Wolf Tombe is Chief Technology Officer of Customs and Border Protection. Tom Bayer is the CIO of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Frank Konieczny, CTO in the Office of Information Dominance and CIO at the Air Force. And Lorraine Cleary, Director of Product Management and Network Sales Specialist for Avaya Government Solutions. I'm your host, Tom Temin, Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
On behalf of Avaya Government Solutions, thank you for joining us for this informative discussion. You'll be presented with some polling questions as you leave the webinar to help us improve future sessions. We appreciate your feedback. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you for you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate for this webinar should receive it in the next 2 weeks. Be sure to register for upcoming webinars from WTOP, Federal News Radio, and Fed Insider. Look for upcoming sessions at www.fedinsider.com/events. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.